Welcome to the Life of Hair. My name is James Atkinson. In this episode we're going to do a lovely foilage technique. Now it's not a balayage, but it's definitely a foiling technique, but it gives a nice, very blended, rooty balayage-esque effect. So we've got to be careful what we name these things. I'm going to stick with foilage. The reality is that we can confuse clients with these terms. So this is a foiling technique. It's definitely not a balayage. You cannot get the kind of lift you can get from a foilage that you can get from this particular technique using foil. So I hope you enjoy the episode from you, and if you do take something away with you, either do me the massive favor of hitting the subscribe button. We're nearly at 90,000 followers. I can't believe it. So close to 100,000 followers. I never set out to do that, obviously. I never even thought I'd get to 10,000, but here we are on the road to 100k followers. So a big thank you to everyone who hit the subscribe button, joins in regularly, leaves comments down below, and shares these videos with anybody who they think might benefit. It really does help the channel out. I appreciate you all massively. Have a wonderful day, week, month, year, and I'll see you again very soon for another episode of The Life of Hair. So this is the before, and as you can see, it has grown out beautifully. We did exactly the same technique previously, and it has created beautiful, subtle regrowth that I absolutely love. My client loves. She only comes in around every 10 weeks or so, so she really wants it to grow out beautifully. So this particular technique, this foilage technique, creates a really beautiful regrowth. So I thought it was really interesting for everyone to see that before we start. Now, pre-section's super easy on this. We just split the hair into 4 quadrants, go from the highest point of the head down to the back of the ear. As you can see, the section coming down there behind the ear, and then I've used a slight diagonal backwards section with this particular section. Now some of the ends aren't as light, or they haven't been lightened all the way to the ends, because we leave fairly large gaps in between each of the foils. So some of the foils, especially in the back here, we'll be doing more lightening towards the ends, but obviously if the hair is previously pre-lightened, we obviously want to avoid putting bleach onto hair that is already lightened, because it will cause undue damage completely unnecessarily. So always avoid putting bleach on hair that is previously been bleached, especially if you're going to leave it to process for a little while, like we are in this particular instance. Now, with regard to the technique, you can see that I've taken a reasonably large section in between each of these sections that I've taken. That first section that was about 1.5 inches from the hairline, and this subsequent section is probably another 1.5 inches up the head. Now, the thing about these techniques is that they need what I like to describe as negative space, hair that is not lightened, because that creates the contrast to make the colour really pop. So you do need to be mindful, I suppose, of how close you put your sections together. Obviously, if you're going for a really high impact result, then you might want them to be a little bit closer together. But look, I can assure you that if you work with sections that are less than 1 centimetre, you'll probably be doing work that really doesn't look like you've done as much work as you have, if that makes sense. Any of you out there knows exactly what I'm saying there. You put a lot of foils in and you feel like you've done the client a really big solid favour for putting tons and tons of foils in, but the reality is that actually you didn't need to put all those foils in for this technique, or for the technique that you were doing. You could have done it over less foils. I always find that less is more, and if you're one of those people that puts in too many foils to most people's hair, try and do less foils. Use finer sections as well. Finer sections really make a big difference. One of the main things about a fine section is that you can saturate the hair really well. As you can see on the screen right now, I use my brush to move this section around left to right and paint the section vertically as well, to make sure that I get maximum saturation throughout each strand of hair, to get that hair lifting beautifully. It is really important to bear that in mind in this particular instance. I can see that piece of hair is just not separating very well, so I'm using my brush to move the hair around and just evaluate the sections to make sure that you have got the optimum saturation in each of your sections. Now I'll talk about the application of the foils in just a second, because there is a technique to this, but I'll talk to you a little bit about obviously this crown area and how I kind of approach that in different circumstances. Now, as I've come up to the crown area here, I've left a triangle of hair on the right and I've left a triangle of hair on the left, and I've incorporated both of those triangles hair together. So I've got now a bigger triangle section to work through this crown area. Now I tend to go vertically through the crown here if the crown area doesn't separate or split too much. You know, some people's crown areas, the hair sits in its natural fall, and then that creates undue kind of stripiness potentially when the hair is laying naturally. In this particular instance, there's no strong crowns, there's no strong partings, and so it's okay in all intensive purposes to work straight through the crown area. But obviously I advise you to take a look at that before you start your technique and decide exactly what you're going to do with this crown area. Because I think on most techniques, and even in cutting techniques, it's a good idea to assess the crown area, the nape, to see how the hair is laying, so that you can ensure that you're getting the best technique onto that specific area possible. Lots of graduated bob techniques exclude the crown area to the very last thing to allow for any kind of jumps in the crown area so the graduation sits perfectly. And it's exactly the same in this particular instance. I've only put 3 foils into this top section. Again, we want to make sure that the spaces in between each of the foils are wide enough that we're not kind of overloading this crown area. But one of the things you may come to notice is that the weave has changed slightly. I'm using a much finer weave. There's lots of weaves in this particular section, but we are obviously trying not to create too much separation and definition in this specific area, because we don't want the crown area to look stripy. We want this area to look completely diffused and really, really blended. Final section in this crown section, and we'll just speed it up so that you guys don't have to watch me apply another foil, but I just want you to get the idea of how this crown section works, because it is one of the areas that I get a lot of kind of questions from when I'm teaching, and I get a lot of comments about the crown area on other videos that I've done where I haven't really specifically covered it in a lot of detail. So this is about me kind of giving you the best insights into this particular area as possible. Now, when we work in the front section, although we split it into 4 quadrants, we're going to take a horizontal section across the parietal ridge. That's the bone that curves away from the ear as you go up the head. It follows on from the temple area at the front hairline, or some people call it the recession. We take a diagonal backward section. Diagonal backward sections, or diagonal sections in general, create softness. So we always want to amplify any of our techniques with extra softness. That's why we are backcombing in this particular instance. We're diffusing, we're backcombing down towards the root area. That is where the Teasy light name comes from, because we're teasing the hair. Now, what we want to make sure is we're not creating very, very thick backcombing. That would not be a good look for this particular technique, not in terms of getting it out especially. I mean, my particular client here, her hair knots up very easily. Now I'm only going to put 3 foils in, and this little bit of hair I've got in my hand now, I'm going to leave until I do the top section, and I'll incorporate that into the top section, and I'll show you how that comes about in just a second. But when we tease the hair, we want to make sure that we've got a nice fine section of hair, and that we're just doing very, very gentle, long brush strokes down towards the root area to create a very, very loose diffusion, or a tease. Lots of people call these different names in different places. I like foilage. Teasy lights is another one that people call these things. But, you know, whatever you call it, it doesn't really matter. It's the same thing. It's a very lived-in balayage, and I'm using air commas, although you can't see me, because ultimately, whatever you call it, it creates a look that is a lived-in blonde, a very soft, subtle, diffused technique that, as you saw in the beginning, still looks great 10 weeks later. Now in terms of this top section, and there's a slight fringe area going on here, we are mindful of the placement of these sections, and we do want a little bit more lightness in this front area, so we've done these two front sections slightly closer together, and that is really important to kind of bear in mind. Whatever our client's trying to achieve with their hair, we need to try and facilitate that. But in some instances, with some techniques, for example, this is not going to look like a money piece or anything like that. It's just going to have a little bit more definition in that front area, because although my client has previously shown me money piece pictures, because she's got shorter hair in the front there, it's very, very difficult to facilitate a true money piece look, because you need the kind of length that flows from that front hairline down into the length. And that is really, really important when you're thinking about creating kind of money piece techniques, or any technique that your client wants to you to try and put onto their hair. You really have to think about what that requires, and does your client have the right hair type or haircut or texture or whatever it is you are trying to achieve for your client. And obviously they can be some of the sort of contraindications, factors of which you can't do the technique as you would like to for their own taste. But I think if you're honest with them and you kind of describe to them that, you know, why they can't have that, they're always understanding. And if they're not understanding, then maybe they're just not the right client. But you can be assured that if you're giving them good, clear advice and you're giving them options for alternatives, I think 99% of the time you won't fall into kind of having an argument with your client about what they can and can't have. And I have seen that, you know, where people are saying, well, you can't have that, or why not, you know, but the why not is because of the frustration of you not giving them alternative options. So again, this technique, super simple. As you can see, it's repeated itself all the way through. In a minute, we're going to see the finished result, but the technique is so simple. We're going to take a 1.5 inch wide section, subdivide that section, pull the hair out flat between our fingers, and back comb down towards the roots. We are back combing down towards the root, but we're really not trying to like create a padding as if we're going to do an updo, and then put the clip in to secure the back combing into position. I find this incredibly useful because it stops it all coming away. And then we go in and we weave the section afterwards. And again, this is just kind of amping up the diffusion and the softness. This is a reminder of what it looked like just before we started, and it's still really beautiful and soft, but we're only refreshing, so we're just taking it up higher to the top. You can see now here where, because we've got those 1 and 1.5 inch sections in between our sections, we've got great definition at those points of light that travel up towards the root area, and they blend seamlessly down into the length. And you can see those couple of lighter pieces that kind of swish through that side fringe area, and it just gives it a little bit more blonde around the face. But obviously we couldn't fully facilitate a money piece because those hairs are too short around the face. If you've enjoyed this episode, please let me know down in the comment section. I always love hearing from you and answering your questions when I get the chance. I'm sorry I've been a bit lapsed with answering questions and comments recently, but I promise you I'll be back to it very soon. It's been a bit of a turbulent time recently, so I hope you're all well. Thank you very much for watching. See you in the next one.